Welcome to Blueprint to Billions, Leverage and Legacy in Apartments.
Welcome to Season 2 of Blueprint to Billions, where legal strategy meets real estate scale. HUD attorney and multifamily housing strategist Terry Bruner has spent his career guiding developers, nonprofits, and investors through complex housing transactions with a focus on building both legacy and leverage. And today we're going inside the deal room. Terry will unpack what shifts when the table is full of power players and how credibility is built or lost in real time. This is Inside the Deal Room. Terry, sir, welcome back.
Thank you, Evan. Always good to be back.
Good to see you. Good to see you. Now, last time we talked about building relationships. Now let's kind of talk about using them in the room. What changes when the deal table is full of power players?
There's a common acronym in today's world, BDE, but it's not what we think it is. It's big deal energy.
I was like, where are you going with this, Terry? This is a family show.
No, it's big deal energy, and it's interesting. You know, when you get into these situations where the deal team comes together and you've got you've got the investors, and you got the moneyed folks, you've got the lenders, you've got the attorneys, and in our world, you've got the government folks there. And it's really, really interesting to see how all this comes together. Now, in the old days, there was actually a real table where you were sitting around and these conversations would happen. It still happens, in various offices across the country, obviously. But a lot of times now it's virtually. So you could be on Zoom and or you could be on Teams or something and you see this happen. But it's very, very telling to just kind of get a read of the room, who's talking, who's not talking, who shows up, who doesn't show up. And I think it really sets kind of a dynamic in place for really how the rest of the deal is going to flow based on, who's in the room and who's doing the talking.
So who usually has the loudest voice in that room, though? How do you balance it with the quiet but, critical voices?
I won't say usually because that's probably too strong. It's not uncommon to hear the folks with the money doing the talking and being the loudest voices in the room. But I'll also say I've had plenty of instances where clients had plenty of money and they were low key. They were happy just to kind of sit back and let the process unfold. And this is not disparaging or in any way a knock on my profession. But I'll be honest with you, a lot of times the loudest voices in the room, they're attorneys. And there are other experts. And, when you're an attorney, I think you're trained from the earliest days to, present and to come across as really the most knowledgeable person in the room. Sometimes we think we've got to be the smartest people in the room. And so you find a lot of times the experts, particularly the attorneys or the architects, or the people who are really the technocrats in the room, they're the ones doing all the talking. They're the ones sort of, trying to set the table because they want to establish expertise. And a lot of times what ends up happening is particularly if you're new to the process, it can be intimidating. I mean, just to put a face on it, there's actually a fair amount of intimidation that comes along with this. And if you're not careful with the right sense of, representation and the right sense of who you are, that intimidation can really lead to unintended consequences, sometimes negatively so.
Well, what are some of the mistakes you see these new players make when they first step into these negotiations besides what you just mentioned?
So when you're a new player and you've got, billions of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars at play, a lot of times, particularly if you haven't done it before, which is, obviously the meaning of a novice, but if you haven't done it before, unless you are really self-assured, it's very easy for you to sit back. And so I typically see two problems that are kind of mirror images or flip sides of the same coin. On the one side, you have the folks who just don't say anything. They sort of leave the talking, they leave the discussion, they leave all of the finer points to their hired help, whether those are attorneys or consultants, or even in some cases just delegating to the lenders and who the lenders designate to speak. So you see that kind of trepidation and not really wanting to engage. That can lead, I think, to some things being questioned at the end of the deal, like on deal terms, for example, that should have been negotiated up front but weren't, largely because someone just didn't speak up. The other side of it, though, is something we've talked about before, when you have people who've done deals before, but maybe they haven't done a HUD deal, and they come in with all of this litany of experience in prior situations, prior deals, prior circumstances, and then they started, they sort of dominate the conversation in the sense of, no, I know what this is going to look like because I've done it before. I've done this deal, I've done that deal, I've done Freddie, I've done whatever. And so now, without any, and even if you've done other HUD deals, every deal is unique. Everything is specific to that particular thing. So it's either you're doing too much talking with too much swag, or you're not doing enough talking with too little swag. And in each case, they both end up creating situations and circumstances that probably won't be good for the overall deal outlook. So the bottom line is, be honest, be forthright, be inquisitive, and speak when you need to speak, and get clarity when you need to get clarity.
Wow. So can you break down the role of lenders, developers, government pros who really, move the needle?
Yeah. So, in a typical deal that we work on, so a typical HUD deal, you will have a lender, which is, think of that as a bank. So, and this is not so think of Chase Bank, and I'm not saying Chase is the
Right.
lender, but just think of Chase Bank. So you'll have someone from the bank or the lender who's there, who essentially wants to give money to someone who wants to develop a piece of property. So if you're building something from the very ground up, the lender is going to be there, kind of talking through whatever needs to be spoken to. They usually will have someone who's underwriting the deal. So those people are called underwriters. And there's typically someone who's going to be kind of the production guy or the production lady who's shepherding this thing through. They will usually have an attorney present for the lender. So the attorney is the hired, representative legally for the lender. The developer is essentially the same as the borrower, someone who really wants to get a new project off the ground and done. Usually the development team will have, the principal guy or the principal girl, and I'm using guy and girl interchangeably here, but usually there's someone from the developer side who wants to borrow money from the lender.
Hmm.
There's then a team of people, if they're, if you're fairly sophisticated, and I wouldn't advise you to go into these meetings without a team of folks, but there are other people from the borrower side or the developer side who's there. And sometimes someone like me, an attorney, will be present representing the borrower's interest. Then you will also have an assortment of other players there. So you could have, in this case, where you're at HUD, you'll have the government officials who are basically, you're basically talking to them saying, hey, you should support government, you should support this transaction by giving the lender insurance on the loan that they're about to make. So you're essentially all there to pitch your project or to pitch your deal to the government. And the hope is that the government's going to like your deal so much that they're going to give you what's called a firm commitment. And that firm commitment then is going to allow you to go build something new. In the case of an assumption, you're just pitching them to say, hey, my guy is good enough to step in to take over the note or to take over the loan on this thing. But government, we still need your approval to do that. You'll also have a bevy of other players in the room. So you might have architects, you might have, some sort of land consultant or other people who do environmental work, but just a bevy of kind of, we call those people third parties, all indispensable to the deal, but people who are nonetheless in the room to make it happen.
So Terry, at all the people you mentioned, does anyone in particular move the needle more than the other, or is it kind of an all, encompassing thing, everybody working together?
Everybody's working together. I think if you were talking to a lender's attorney, they'd say they're the ones moving the needle more than anybody else. And let's be clear about it. Anytime you go and ask someone for money, whether it's your cousin, your brother, or a bank, there are going to be certain stipulations, requirements, and all sorts of other things that the lender can rightfully ask you. So it's a little bit nonsensical to think that there isn't something of a power dynamic in the
Hmm.
proverbial deal room when you sit down with a lender. Now, obviously, as a person or an entity that's trying to leverage what the lender is affording you, you obviously want to be smart and you want to have sophisticated people around you so that the requirements that the lender is imposing on you, they're reasonable and they are reasonably tailored to meet whatever the deal terms are,
Right.
so that if anything ever goes wrong, you're not going to lose everything in the process. So I think in terms of
Mm.
just the power dynamic, you probably would say that it tilts a little bit to the lender, but you also have to that also comes with a grain of salt because if lenders really want to stay in business, they need to make loans, and so
Mm.
it's not like the borrower and the developers are without any leverage in that process.
So Terry, have you ever had to save a deal that was falling apart because people weren't aligned and people weren't on the same page when they were in the room?
Yeah, sometimes even within the same team. So I have seen a deal or two where, for example, the architect or the general contractor is not on the same page as the owner. And usually this comes back to bite people when you're in the process of building a building, you're in the process of building the apartment complex, and now you're at the final stages where you've gotten it built and it's time to turn over the keys to the owner. It's time to start, building occupancy and getting people moved into this brand new structure. But if there are work orders or if there are other things that are out, pending because a contractor hasn't been paid, or maybe the architect and the owner or the architect and the general contractor have a disagreement about how something needs to look. Like maybe, I mean, it's simple. Maybe it's a roof, maybe it's an overhang, maybe it's like the sidewalk leading up to the leasing office or something that they didn't agree on, or they say this differs from what the plans and specifications call for. There have actually been situations where they have held up final closing because those two parties can't agree. And so, in my job, it's my job to say, look, guys, let's keep the main thing the main thing. Let's get this thing closed, and then we can work out your dispute after it's all said and done. A lot of times people are reluctant to do that, though, because what they fear is if they get the final nod to approve and it's all said and done, then there's no further leverage for them to come back and wrangle anything out of that process or wrest anything from that process. So yeah, it happens. It happens quite a bit. I mean, we're on a deal right now where there's an active dispute between an owner of the complex and one of their general contractors or their subcontractor, and it's an active process to try to navigate and mediate that.
Wow. So what does it take to be seen though as credible in that room, especially if you're not one of the biggest players?
Well, I think you have to bring something to the process.
Hmm.
So it's either money or it's expertise or it's the ability to leverage, relationships to put everyone together. Everyone has a role. It's very similar to what we've talked about in previous episodes, like around a sports team. You get in trouble when the quarterback thinks he's the kicker, or you get in trouble when the wide receiver thinks that they're actually a lineman. Everyone has a
Hmm.
role to play, and when everyone plays their role in the right way to the right specs, then the deal typically goes the right way. It goes according to plan. When anyone gets out of character and out of role, and any one party to that deal tries to assume a different mantle than what their given responsibilities are, that's typically where things start coming unglued.
Hmm. So for attorneys listening, how does owning your niche help you walk into any room with that authority, with that, that expertise?
Yeah, well, expertise is a wonderful thing to have. And the best thing you have as a professional is, well, two things: it's your reputation and it's your expertise. So I'm a big fan of saying you need to constantly be growing your expertness in whatever it is that you do. What that gives you is authority. And that authority actually precedes you. So, one of the reasons why attorneys, unfortunately or fortunately, tend to be the loudest voices in the room is because when you step in the room, you're going to own your expertise. And owning that
Mm.
expertise at times can feel a little, it can feel a little overbearing. But as an attorney, when you step in the room, the greatest thing that you have in that process is that you know what the process is, and you're going to leverage that process or utilize that process for your client's best benefit. That's why you're there. And I've built a whole course around building your expertness and drilling down and owning your
Right.
expertise, at the niche practice. The reason for that though is because it's the best selling authority you'll ever have, because you know it, you do it, and people recognize that you know and you do it.
Mm. So what's an example of a time where everyone pulling in different directions costs money or maybe even time?
The examples are probably too numerous for me to list, but but I will say we've had instances where, for example, we go through the entirety of the government approval process for a TPA, a loan assumption. We get everything approved. We're 3 weeks, away from closing, and then the parties have something of a dispute. And I'm talking about internal dispute, right? Where one partner says to the other partner, "Hey, you're going to pay X number of dollars on the insurance, and then we're going to pay X number of dollars on the other thing." And then they have a dispute saying, "No, that's not what we agreed to." And if that's the case, then the whole closing then is thrown into peril because they can't actually get their stuff together. So in that instance, specifically, it costs not only money, but it also costs an incredible amount of time to the point where the letter, the letter that we get from HUD to close said you have to close in a specified period of time. I think in this case it was 45 days. This thing stretched out so far, and the dispute dragged on so wide that not only did we have to go ask for one extension, we had to ask for a second extension. The second extension ultimately expired, and we had to start the process all over again. And that was totally because they were not pulling in the same direction on the same team. That's critical. The second thing, though, we've seen instances where we go through this entire process, we get an approval, and then the buyer and the seller, they actually have a dispute about something that we thought had been agreed to months prior. Or, for example, they want to change some particular verbiage in a document, and that's a problem because what we submit to HUD is exactly what we need to close on. So then you've got to unwind that, and then you got to figure out how to unwind it and where to go with that and go back to HUD. And in both of those instances, it not only costs time, but every time you add time to something, there's usually more fees because everyone then increases more costs. The carrying costs increases, the professionals, their costs increases, the title companies, all of those things increases. And on top of it now, you've got extension fees that are on top of all of that. And then you've got these problems where time and money are at play. And in real estate, typically time is money.
Absolutely. So on the flip side, Terry, can you share a story where that perfect alignment made that magic in the room?
Yeah. I mean, one of my fondest memories is working with a local church to build a senior apartment complex.
Wow.
Everyone was aligned. The members of the church wanted it. The community wanted it. The government officials wanted it. There was just a perfect alignment of what this thing needed to be, what it needed to look like, what it needed to actually say, what it needed to say to the community. And when you have deals like that, which are rare, it leaves such a warm and fuzzy feeling because you feel like you've actually been a part of something that makes life better for people. And it's not just about the dollars and cents at that point.
Love it. Terry, sir, appreciate the time.
Thank you, Evan. I appreciate you.
And thank you all for tuning in to Blueprint to Billions. If you're navigating HUD-backed development and want to elevate your credibility from day one, connect with Mr. Terry Bruner at terrybrunerlaw.com. And if you're an attorney looking to build a legal practice on your own terms, outside of the big firm pressure and into the niche that actually reflects your values, check out Terry's course at thenichepractice.com. Subscribe, leave a review, and share this episode with someone else that might find it helpful. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.